The shot rang out across the dusty plaza of Abaquiu, New Mexico, and every man watching knew they had just witnessed something extraordinary happen on that scorching August afternoon in 1878. Sarah Victoria Chambers lowered her Winchester rifle, the barrel still smoking in the relentless sun, and squinted at the tin can that now lay shattered on the fence post 100 yards away. 14 men had already taken their shots, and not one of them had hit the target with such precision. The crowd that had gathered around the makeshift shooting range fell into an uncomfortable silence, the kind that happens when something unexpected challenges everything people thought they knew about the world. Sarah stood there in her split riding skirt and dusty white blouse, her dark blonde hair tied back in a practical braid that hung down between her shoulder blades. She was 22 years old, and she had learned to shoot from her father before consumption took him 2 years ago. Since then, she had been running their small ranch on the outskirts of town with just 2 hired hands and her own determination. People in Abaquiu respected her work ethic, but they had never seen her shoot before. Now they were seeing exactly what Daniel Chambers had taught his daughter in those long afternoons when the cattle were grazing, and time moved slow as honey. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Sarah could feel the weight of disapproval hanging in the air like the dust that never quite settled in this high desert country. She had not meant to show anyone up. She had simply seen the contest advertised outside the general store and figured the $10 prize money would help pay for the new fence posts she desperately needed. But now she realized she had done something that would not be easily forgiven in a town where women were expected to keep to certain boundaries. Then, from somewhere near the back of the crowd, came the sound of clapping. It started slow and deliberate, just 2 hands coming together in a steady rhythm that cut through the tension like a knife through butter. Sarah turned toward the sound and saw a tall cowboy stepping forward, his hat tilted back enough that she could see his face. He was young, maybe 25 or 26, with dark hair and eyes that held something she could not quite name. His hands kept moving together in that steady beat, and there was nothing mocking in the gesture. It was genuine applause, the kind given to someone who had earned it. Within moments, others began to join in. First 1 or 2 of the older men who had competed, then more, until the whole crowd was clapping and some were even cheering. The tension broke like a summer storm finally releasing its rain, and Sarah felt something warm bloom in her chest. She had won the respect of these men not through their charity, but through her skill, and this cowboy had been brave enough to acknowledge it first. After the contest organizer grudgingly handed over her prize money, Sarah found herself surrounded by men wanting to know where she had learned to shoot like that, what kind of rifle she preferred, whether she had ever hunted elk in the mountains. She answered their questions politely but kept glancing over shoulders, looking for the tall cowboy who had clapped first. She wanted to thank him, though she was not entirely sure why it mattered so much. She finally spotted him near the hitching post, checking the cinch on a handsome bay gelding. Sarah walked over, her boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. Up close, she could see he had a strong jaw and a straight nose that looked like it might have been broken once and healed well. There was a kindness in his eyes that contradicted the hard planes of his face. "Excuse me," she said, and he turned toward her with a slight smile. "I wanted to thank you for what you did back there, for clapping. It meant something." He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that was somehow both casual and respectful. "No need to thank me, miss. You earned it fair and square. That was some of the finest shooting I have seen in a long time, and I have seen quite a bit." "Sarah Chambers," she said, extending her hand like her father had taught her to do when meeting someone as an equal. He took her hand, and his grip was firm but careful. Russell Hayes. I work for the Triple H Ranch about 10 miles north of here. Been in Abiquiu for a few weeks helping move cattle. Hayes, she repeated, testing the name. I do not think I have seen you around town before. We do not come into town much during the working season. Too much to do and not enough hours to do it in. But we finished a big drive yesterday, so the boss gave us some time off. He gestured toward the plaza where the shooting contest had been held. I figured I would see what all the commotion was about. Did not expect to see someone shoot like you did. Sarah felt her cheeks warm, and it was not from the sun. My father taught me. He said that out here, everyone needs to know how to handle a gun, man or woman. Rattlesnakes do not care about your gender, and neither do cattle thieves. Russell laughed, a genuine sound that made the corners of his eyes crinkle. Your father sounds like he was a wise man. He was. Sarah looked down at the prize money she still held in her hand. He died 2 years ago. I have been running the ranch since then. That must be hard work for anyone, let alone running it on your own. I have 2 good men working for me. They were loyal to my father and they have stayed loyal to me. We manage. She did not mention the sleepless nights worrying about money, or the way some of the other ranchers looked at her land like they were just waiting for her to fail so they could buy it cheap. What about you? Have you been working ranches long? Since I was 14. My father had a small place in Colorado, but we lost it in the financial panic of '73. I have been hiring out ever since, learning the trade from every ranch that will have me. He patted his horse's neck affectionately. Someday I would like to have my own place again, but that day is still a ways off. They talked for a while longer, the conversation flowing easy as water. Sarah learned that Russell had worked on ranches from Colorado to Texas, that he preferred horses to cattle but would work with either, that he had a younger sister, married and living in Denver. Russell learned that Sarah had grown up in Abiquiu, that her mother had died when she was just a baby, that she loved this harsh, beautiful country despite its challenges. The sun was starting to sink toward the western horizon when Russell finally said, I should let you get on with your day. But I was wondering if maybe I could call on you sometime, if that would be acceptable, I mean. Sarah felt that warm feeling in her chest again, stronger this time. I would like that. The Chambers Ranch is about 4 miles east of town, right where the road forks toward the mountains. You cannot miss it. Then I will see you soon, Miss Chambers. Sarah, she corrected. If you are going to call on me, you should probably use my first name. He smiled again, that same genuine expression that made something flutter in her stomach. Sarah, then, and you can call me Russell. She rode home that evening with more than just prize money in her pocket. She carried the memory of his smile, the sound of his clapping when everyone else had been silent, and the possibility of something new growing in the spaces between her responsibilities and worries. The Chambers Ranch was modest by most standards. 200 acres of grazing land, a small house that her father had built with his own hands, a barn that needed new shingles, and a corral that held her 6 horses. Her 2 hired hands, Miguel and Charlie, lived in a bunkhouse near the barn. They had both been there when Sarah rode in that evening, and Miguel had raised an eyebrow at the smile on her face. You won the contest, he said. It was not a question. How did you know? Because you look happy, and you would not look happy if you lost. Miguel was 53 years old, originally from Santa Fe, and had worked for her father for 15 years. He had a weathered face and a dry sense of humor that Sarah appreciated. How much did you win? $10. Enough for those fence posts we need for the north pasture. Charlie, who was 28 and had drifted in from Kansas 5 years ago, let out a low whistle. You beat all those men. I wish I could have seen their faces. Most of them took it well enough. Eventually, she dismounted and started unsaddling her mare, a dapple gray named Silver. There was a cowboy there who clapped first, Russell Hayes. He works for the Triple H. Miguel and Charlie exchanged a look that Sarah pretended not to notice. Russell Hayes, Miguel repeated. I know that name. Good reputation. Hard worker. Honest. He is going to call on me, Sarah said, keeping her voice casual as she carried her saddle into the tack room. Is he now? Charlie grinned. Well, good for you, Sarah. About time you had something nice happen. That night, Sarah lay in bed listening to the coyotes singing in the distance and thinking about Russell Hayes. She had not been courted before, not really. A few awkward attempts by local boys when she was younger, but nothing serious. After her father died, most of the single men in town had treated her more like a curiosity than a potential wife. She was too independent, too capable, too unwilling to pretend she needed rescuing. But Russell had not looked at her like she was strange. He had looked at her like she was impressive. She fell asleep with a smile on her face and dreamed of steady applause and kind eyes. Russell showed up 3 days later on a Sunday afternoon, his bay gelding freshly groomed and his own clothes cleaned of trail dust. Sarah had been mending a saddle strap on the porch when she saw him riding up the long drive. She set down her work and stood, suddenly very aware of her own appearance. She had put on a clean dress that morning, a blue cotton one that her father had bought her 2 Christmases ago, and she had taken extra care with her hair. Now she was glad she had. Afternoon, Sarah, Russell said as he dismounted. He had a bouquet of wildflowers in his hand, Indian paintbrush and purple aster that must have taken him some time to gather. I hope I am not coming at a bad time. Not at all. I was just doing some repairs. She took the flowers, touched by the gesture. These are beautiful, thank you. They grow all over the place up near the Triple H. I figured they would travel better than the roses from town. I like them better than roses anyway. They belong here. She gestured toward the porch. Would you like to sit for a while? I made some lemonade this morning. They sat on the porch steps, drinking lemonade and talking about everything and nothing. Russell told her about a troublesome bull they were trying to move, and Sarah told him about her plans to expand her herd next spring. The conversation was comfortable, punctuated by easy silences that did not feel awkward. Miguel and Charlie made themselves scarce, but Sarah knew they were probably watching from the barn, evaluating this man who had come calling on their boss. She would hear their opinions later whether she wanted to or not. Can I see your ranch? Russell asked eventually. If you do not mind showing me around. They walked the property together, Sarah pointing out the improvements her father had made and the ones she hoped to make herself. Russell listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed he understood ranching and respected what she was trying to do. When they reached the north pasture where her small herd was grazing, he leaned on the fence and watched the cattle for a long moment. You have some good stock here, he said. That red heifer, the one with the white face, she looks like she is carrying well. She is due in about a month. First calf. Sarah leaned on the fence beside him, close enough that she could smell the clean scent of soap and leather. I am hoping for a strong calf. Her mother was one of the best producers we ever had. You talk about this place like you love it. I do love it. It is all I have left of my father, all I have left of my family. She paused, then added, but it is more than that. This land, this work, it makes sense to me. I know what needs to be done and I can see the results of my labor. There is something honest about that. Russell turned to look at her, and there was understanding in his eyes. I know exactly what you mean. That is why I want my own place someday. Not because I want to be rich, but because I want to build something that matters. They stood there for a while, watching the cattle graze and the shadows lengthen across the pasture. Sarah felt a sense of rightness settling over her like a warm blanket. This man understood her in a way that few people did. He did not see her ranch as a burden she carried or a prize to be won. He saw it as what it was, a dream worth fighting for. When Russell finally had to leave as the sun was setting, he paused before mounting his horse. "Can I come back next Sunday? If you want me to, I mean." "I want you to," Sarah said, and meant it with her whole heart. The following weeks fell into a pattern that Sarah came to cherish. Russell would ride out every Sunday, sometimes staying for just a few hours, sometimes staying until dusk forced him to head back to the Triple H. They would talk and walk the ranch and slowly, carefully, begin to build something between them that felt both fragile and incredibly strong. On his third visit, Russell brought his guitar and played songs on the porch while Sarah listened. He had a good voice, rich and warm, and the songs he chose were a mix of old ballads and trail songs that cowboys sang to calm cattle at night. Sarah found herself swaying slightly to the music, feeling more relaxed than she had in months. On his fifth visit, they rode out together to check on the cattle, and Russell showed her a trick for calming a skittish horse that one of his old bosses had taught him. They spent the afternoon working side by side, and Sarah was struck by how natural it felt to have him there, how easily they moved around each other. On his seventh visit, it rained, a sudden summer storm that blew in from the mountains and turned the dust to mud. They sat on the porch watching the water come down in sheets, and Russell reached over and took her hand. Sarah felt her breath catch, felt her heart start to beat faster. His hand was warm and calloused and strong, and holding it felt like the most natural thing in the world. "I need to tell you something," Russell said, his voice quiet under the sound of the rain. "I am falling in love with you, Sarah. I know it has not been that long, but I cannot help how I feel. You are the most remarkable woman I have ever met." Sarah turned to look at him, seeing the vulnerability in his face, the courage it took to say those words. "I am falling in love with you too," she said. "I did not expect it to happen so fast, but here we are." He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, but Sarah did not want to pull away. She wanted to meet him halfway, to feel his lips on hers, to confirm what her heart already knew. The kiss was gentle and sweet and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both of them were smiling. "I do not have much to offer you right now," Russell said, still holding her hand. "I am just a ranch hand with some savings and a lot of dreams, but I am a hard worker and I am honest, and I will never give you reason to doubt me." "That is enough," Sarah said. "That is more than enough." But even as happiness bloomed between them, Sarah knew that reality would intrude eventually. Russell worked for the Triple H, and his time was not entirely his own. The ranch was preparing for a big cattle drive to the railroad, and Russell would be gone for at least 6 weeks, maybe 2 months. The thought of not seeing him for that long made her chest ache, but she understood. This was the life they had both chosen, a life tied to the land and the seasons and the demands of livestock that could not be ignored. The night before Russell was set to leave with the cattle drive, he rode out to the Chambers Ranch one last time. Sarah had prepared a good meal, pot roast with vegetables from her small garden, and they ate on the porch as the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and purple. "I am going to miss you," Russell said, setting down his fork. "These past 2 months have been the best of my life." "I am going to miss you too, but you will come back and we will pick up right where we left off. I want to marry you, Sarah." The words came out in a rush, like he had been holding them in and could not contain them anymore. "I know it is fast, and I know I do not have a ranch of my own yet, but I love you. I want to spend my life with you. Will you think about it while I am gone? Will you consider being my wife?" Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears. I do not need to think about it. Yes, Russell. I will marry you. He stood and pulled her to her feet, kissing her deeply, holding her like she was something precious. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard, their faces flushed with emotion. When I get back, we will do this right, Russell said. I will talk to the preacher. We will have a proper wedding, whatever you want. I just want you, Sarah said simply. Everything else is just details. They spent the rest of the evening making plans, talking about their future, imagining what their life together would look like. Russell wanted to keep working for a few more years, saving money until they could afford to expand Sarah's ranch or buy more land nearby. Sarah wanted to keep building her herd, maybe start breeding horses as well. They both wanted children someday, a family to fill the house that felt too empty since her father died. When Russell finally had to leave, long after midnight, he kissed her one more time under a sky full of stars. I love you, Sarah Chambers. I will be back before you know it. I love you too, Russell Hayes. Ride safe. She watched him disappear into the darkness, and then she went inside and lay awake for hours, her heart too full of happiness to let her sleep. The weeks that followed were hard in ways Sarah had not anticipated. She threw herself into work, repairing fences and moving cattle and preparing for the fall season. Miguel and Charlie teased her gently about mooning over Russell, but they were both happy for her. They had seen how he treated her, how he respected her, and they approved. Sarah wrote letters to Russell, pouring out her thoughts and feelings onto paper. She told him about the red heifer giving birth to a strong bull calf, about the new fence posts they had installed in the north pasture, about the way the evenings were starting to cool as September approached. She told him about her dreams for their future, about the life she imagined them building together. She did not know if he was getting her letters. Mail delivery to cattle drives was unreliable at best, and she had no way of knowing where exactly they were on the trail. But writing to him made her feel connected to him, made the distance seem less overwhelming. 5 weeks after Russell left, something happened that changed everything. Sarah was in town buying supplies when she overheard 2 men talking outside the saloon. They were Triple H ranch hands, men she recognized from around town, and they were discussing the cattle drive. Heard there was trouble up near Raton Pass, one of them said. Some outlaws tried to rustle part of the herd. There was shooting. Sarah's blood ran cold. She stepped closer, not caring if they noticed her eavesdropping. Anyone hurt? The second man asked. A few men wounded. One cowboy took a bullet in the shoulder, but he is supposed to be okay. They drove the outlaws off. Who got shot? Did not catch all the names. Hayes, I think, was one of them. Sarah felt the world tilt sideways. She grabbed the porch post to steady herself, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Russell had been shot. The men noticed her then, and their expressions shifted from casual gossip to concern. Miss Chambers, are you all right? The man who was shot, Hayes, do you know his first name? They exchanged a glance. I think it was Russell. Yeah, Russell Hayes, you know him. He is my fiancé. The word felt strange on her tongue, too new and too precious. Is he alive? Do you know anything else? The message said he was wounded but not in danger. They had a doctor with them in the nearest town. That is all I know, miss. I am sorry. Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She finished her shopping in a daze and rode home as fast as she dared push Silver. Once there, she told Miguel and Charlie what she had heard, and both men tried to reassure her that Russell would be fine, that shoulder wounds were painful but rarely fatal if treated properly. But Sarah could not shake the fear that had settled in her chest like a stone. She kept imagining worst-case scenarios, kept seeing Russell hurt and in pain, maybe calling her name. The nights were the hardest. She would lie in bed staring at the ceiling, praying to a God she was not sure was listening, bargaining for Russell's safety. "Please let him be okay," she prayed. "Please bring him back to me. I will do anything. Just please let him be okay." 2 more weeks crawled by with no word. Sarah went through the motions of running the ranch, but her heart was not in it. Miguel and Charlie picked up the slack without complaint, understanding that she was suffering in a way that had nothing to do with physical labor. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon in late September, Sarah was working in the corral when she saw a rider coming up the road. Her heart leaped into her throat. Even from a distance, she recognized the bay gelding, recognized the way the rider sat in the saddle. Russell. She dropped the rope she had been coiling and ran, not caring how it looked, not caring about anything except getting to him. He dismounted carefully, favoring his left side, and then she was in his arms, holding him as tight as she dared, feeling his heart beat against hers. "You are here," she said against his chest. "You are alive. You are here." "I am here," he confirmed, his voice rough with emotion. "I am sorry I could not get word to you sooner. The whole drive has been chaos." She pulled back enough to look at him, really look at him. He was thinner than she remembered, with new lines around his eyes that spoke of pain and exhaustion. His left arm was in a sling. "Your shoulder," she said, touching his right arm gently. "I heard you were shot. It is not as bad as it probably sounded." "The bullet went clean through, missed the bone. It hurts like hell, but I will heal." He cupped her face with his good hand. "I thought about you the whole time. Even when things got bad, thinking about you kept me going." They went up to the house, and Sarah made him sit down while she examined his wound. Someone had stitched it neatly, and it appeared to be healing well, but she could see it still caused him pain. She made coffee and brought out some leftover cornbread, and Russell ate like he had not had a good meal in days. "Tell me what happened," she said. Russell sighed and set down his cup. "We were about 2 weeks from the railroad when a group of outlaws hit us at night. 6 men, trying to cut out some of the cattle and drive them off. We heard the commotion and went after them. There was shooting, and I caught a bullet before we managed to drive them off. We got most of the cattle back, and the outlaws rode off. They were not organized enough to be a real gang, just opportunists hoping for an easy score. You could have died. But I did not. And once I could ride again, the boss let me come back early. He said I had earned the time off, and they had enough men to finish the drive without me." Russell reached across the table and took her hand. "I needed to see you. I needed to tell you that getting shot made me realize something important. Life is short and uncertain, Sarah. We should not wait to start our future together. I want to marry you as soon as possible. I do not want to waste any more time." Sarah felt tears running down her face, but she was smiling. "Neither do I. Let us get married, Russell. Let us start our life together right now." They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Abaquiu. Sarah wore a simple white dress that the dressmaker in town helped her alter from one that had belonged to her mother. Russell wore a new suit that he had saved up to buy, his arm still in a sling but healing well. Miguel and Charlie stood as witnesses, along with a few of Russell's friends from the Triple H. The preacher kept the ceremony short and sweet, and when he pronounced them husband and wife, Russell kissed Sarah like she was the most precious thing in the world. The whole town seemed to turn out for the celebration afterward. Tables were set up in the plaza, and people brought food and drink and music. Sarah danced with her new husband, careful of his injured shoulder, and felt happier than she had ever thought possible. She had not just gained a husband. She had gained a partner, someone who saw her for who she truly was and loved her for it. That night, they went back to the Chambers Ranch, which was now the Hayes Ranch as well. Miguel and Charlie had discreetly moved themselves to the bunkhouse, giving the newlyweds privacy in the main house. Russell carried Sarah over the threshold, laughing when his shoulder twinged, and they spent their first night as husband and wife, learning each other in ways they had only imagined before. The months that followed were an adjustment for both of them. Russell moved his few possessions into Sarah's house and threw himself into working the ranch. He had fulfilled his obligations to the Triple H, and now he was determined to make his and Sarah's ranch thrive. He brought new ideas and new energy, and Sarah found that running the ranch with a true partner was easier and more rewarding than doing it alone. They worked side by side every day, repairing fences and tending cattle and planning for the future. They argued sometimes, both of them too stubborn to back down easily, but they always talked through their disagreements and found compromises that worked for both of them. Russell never tried to take over or undermine Sarah's authority. He respected that this was her land, her legacy, and he was helping her build on it rather than replacing it with his own vision. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch and watch the sun set over the mountains, talking about their day or simply enjoying each other's company. Russell would play his guitar sometimes, and Sarah would sing along to the songs she knew. Those quiet moments were some of the best parts of their marriage, the times when they were just two people in love, free from the endless demands of ranch life. Winter came hard that year, with snow that piled up against the barn and temperatures that dropped low enough to freeze water troughs solid. They lost a few cattle to the cold, but fewer than they might have without Russell's experience managing winter herds. He taught Sarah techniques he had learned working ranches in Colorado, ways to keep the stock sheltered and fed when the weather turned brutal. Spring brought new calves, and the backbreaking work of branding and vaccinating. Sarah and Russell worked dawn to dusk with Miguel and Charlie, and sometimes they had to hire extra help from town. But when it was done, and they could see the healthy calves following their mothers across the greening pasture, the sense of accomplishment was worth every aching muscle. One evening in early May, Sarah was washing dishes after supper when she felt Russell's arms wrap around her from behind. He rested his chin on her shoulder, and she leaned back into his warmth. "I have been thinking," he said quietly. "We have been married almost 7 months now, and the ranch is doing well. Better than well, actually. We have money in the bank for the first time in years." "Thanks to you," Sarah said. "You have worked so hard, Russell." "Thanks to us," he corrected. "We are a team, remember." "But here is what I am thinking. There is a parcel of land adjacent to our north pasture that is coming up for sale. Old man Henderson is retiring and moving to Denver to live with his daughter. His 200 acres would nearly double our spread." Sarah turned in his arms to face him. "Can we afford it?" "If we use most of our savings and take out a small loan, yes. It would be tight for a while, but I think we could manage it. The land is good, and having control of that water source on Henderson's property would be invaluable during dry years." They talked it over for hours, weighing the risks against the potential rewards. In the end, they decided to make an offer. A week later, they were the proud owners of 400 acres of high desert grazing land, and the Hayes Ranch was officially a substantial operation. The added land meant more work, and they hired another hand, a young man named Thomas who was eager to learn the ranching business. With 4 men working alongside her, Sarah found she had more time for other things, projects she had been putting off for years. She expanded her garden, started keeping chickens for eggs, even talked about eventually getting some pigs. In the middle of July, Sarah realized she had missed her monthly bleeding. She waited another week to be sure, then another, before she finally allowed herself to believe what her body was telling her. She was carrying Russell's child. She decided to tell him on Sunday after church. They rode home together in the wagon, and Sarah was practically vibrating with the need to share her news. As soon as they were through the door, she turned to Russell and took both his hands in hers. "I have something to tell you," she said, and her voice was shaking. "I am going to have a baby. We are going to have a baby." For a moment, Russell just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then a huge smile broke across his face, and he let out a whoop of joy that probably scared the chickens. He picked Sarah up and spun her around, then immediately set her down again, looking worried. "Did I hurt you? Should I not have done that? What do you need? Should you be resting?" Sarah laughed, feeling giddy with happiness and relief. "I am pregnant, not fragile, but yes, maybe no more spinning for a while." They spent the rest of the day making plans and dreaming about the future. Russell wanted to build an addition onto the house, a proper nursery for the baby. Sarah wanted to write to Russell's sister in Denver to share the good news with family. They argued playfully about names, each of them suggesting increasingly outlandish options just to make the other laugh. That night, lying in bed with Russell's hand resting gently on her still flat stomach, Sarah felt a sense of contentment so profound it brought tears to her eyes. She had everything she had ever wanted, and things she had not even known to dream about. A home, a ranch, a husband who loved her, and now a child on the way. Life was not easy out here in the high desert, but it was good. It was very, very good. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer and into the fall. Sarah continued working as long as she could, though Russell and the men tried to make her take it easier than she wanted. By October, her belly was obviously round, and she had to admit that mounting a horse was becoming difficult. She shifted to lighter tasks, mending tack and keeping the books and planning the next year's operations. Russell became comically overprotective, hovering around her like she might break at any moment. Sarah found it both endearing and frustrating, and she had to remind him regularly that women had been having babies since the beginning of time. But she also appreciated how much he cared, how much he wanted both her and their child to be safe and healthy. In November, they received a letter from Russell's sister Margaret in Denver. She was thrilled about the baby and sent a package of tiny clothes she had knitted herself. Sarah was touched by the gesture from a woman she had never met, and she wrote back immediately, thanking Margaret and telling her about life on the ranch. December brought cold winds and early snow. Sarah spent more time indoors, preparing things for the baby and trying not to think too much about the actual birth. Women died in childbirth out here. It was a fact of life that could not be ignored, but she tried to push those fears aside and focus on the positive. She was strong and healthy. The midwife in town was experienced. Everything would be fine. Russell seemed to sense her occasional moments of fear, and he would hold her close and promise that he would be right there with her, that she was not going to go through this alone. Those promises helped more than he probably knew. The baby came on a cold January night in 1880, 2 weeks earlier than the midwife had predicted. Sarah's water broke while she was making supper, and Russell immediately sent Thomas riding hard for town to fetch Mrs. Murphy, the midwife. Then he helped Sarah to their bedroom and stayed with her, holding her hand through the contractions, wiping her forehead with a cool cloth, murmuring encouragement when the pain got bad. Mrs. Murphy arrived in time to help deliver a healthy baby boy with a lusty cry and a full head of dark hair like his father. Russell cut the cord with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face, and when Mrs. Murphy placed the baby in Sarah's arms, she felt her heart expand in a way she had not known was possible. "We have a son," she whispered, looking up at Russell. "We have a son." "He is perfect," Russell said, his voice choked with emotion. "You are both perfect." They named him Daniel Russell Hayes, after Sarah's father and his own. Little Danny, as they quickly started calling him, was a good baby, nursing well and sleeping in reasonable stretches. Sarah recovered from the birth faster than Mrs. Murphy expected, and within a few weeks she was back to lighter chores around the ranch. Russell was a devoted father from the start. He would walk the floor with Danny when he fussed at night, sing him the same songs he had once played for Sarah on the porch, carry him around in a sling while doing one-handed chores. Miguel and Charlie both took turns being honorary uncles, and even young Thomas was pressed into service holding the baby while Sarah prepared meals. The ranch continued to thrive. The expanded herd meant more calves in the spring of 1880, and they sold beef to the army fort 20 miles south at a good price. Russell's reputation as a skilled rancher was spreading, and other cattlemen would sometimes stop by to ask his advice or discuss breeding stock. Sarah handled the business side of things, keeping meticulous records and making shrewd decisions about when to buy and sell. By the time Danny was a year old, toddling around the ranch yard and getting into everything, Sarah and Russell had paid off their loan for the Henderson property and had money in the bank again. They celebrated quietly, just the two of them after Danny was in bed, drinking a bottle of wine that Russell had bought in town and talking about how far they had come. "You remember that day in Abaquiu?" Russell asked, his arm around Sarah's shoulders as they sat on the porch swing he had built. "The shooting contest, how could I forget? That was the day my life changed." "Mine too. I saw you standing there with that rifle, looking so determined and capable, and I thought to myself that was the most impressive woman I had ever seen. And when everyone went quiet after you won, I could not stand it. You deserved to be celebrated, not shamed." "That was when I started falling in love with you, I think," Sarah said. "When you clapped. When you had the courage to acknowledge what I had done, even though it made some people uncomfortable. That took real character. I was just doing what was right." Russell kissed the top of her head. "Best decision I ever made, though. It led me to you." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the distant cry of an owl and the rustle of the wind through the cottonwoods. Sarah felt Russell's hand move to rest on her stomach, and she smiled. "Are you thinking what I am thinking?" he asked. "That depends. Are you thinking that Danny might like a little brother or sister?" "I am thinking exactly that. Their second child, a daughter they named Rose Margaret Hayes after the wildflowers that grew on the ranch, and Russell's sister, was born in the spring of 1882. The birth was easier than Danny's had been, and Rose was a quieter baby, content to watch the world with her serious blue eyes. Danny, now 2 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister and wanted to help with everything. Life settled into a rhythm that felt sustainable and deeply satisfying. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. They added a small horse breeding operation to their cattle business, specializing in sturdy working horses that could handle the tough terrain. Sarah had a natural talent for evaluating horses, and Russell had the patience to train even the most difficult animals. Miguel retired in 1884, his arthritis finally forcing him to acknowledge that he could no longer do the physical work required on a ranch. Sarah and Russell threw him a party and gave him a generous pension. He moved into town, where he lived with his niece's family and became a fixture in the plaza, telling stories to anyone who would listen. They hired 2 new hands to replace Miguel and help with the expanded operations, both young men who were grateful for steady work and willing to learn. Charlie, now in his late 40s, became the foreman, managing the day-to-day operations and training the new men. He had been with them through everything, and Sarah and Russell trusted him completely. The years rolled by with the steady rhythm of ranch life. calving seasons and branding seasons, buying and selling, droughts and good years, the endless cycle of work that defined their world. Danny grew into a confident, capable boy who loved horses as much as his mother did. Rose was quieter but no less determined, and she showed an early aptitude for figures that made Sarah think she might take over the business side of the ranch someday. In 1886, Sarah and Russell took their children on a trip to Denver to visit Margaret and her family. It was the first time Sarah had left the ranch for more than a day or two since she was a girl, and she was nervous about leaving it in Charlie's hands for a whole week. But Russell insisted they needed a real vacation, and he was right. Denver was overwhelming after the quiet of Abiquiu, but Margaret and her husband James were warm and welcoming. Their 3 children got along well with Danny and Rose, and the adults stayed up late every night talking and laughing. Margaret pulled Sarah aside one evening and said, "I am so glad Russell found you. He wrote to me about you before you were even married, and I could tell from his letters that he was completely in love. You have made him so happy." "He has made me happy too," Sarah said. "I cannot imagine my life without him." On the train ride home, with the children asleep in their seats and the landscape rolling by outside the windows, Russell took Sarah's hand and said, "Thank you for saying yes all those years ago. Thank you for building this life with me." "Thank you for clapping first," Sarah replied, and they both smiled at the memory of where it all began. The ranch continued to prosper through the rest of the 1880s. They weathered economic downturns and harsh winters, droughts that tested everyone's resolve and good years that filled the bank account. They added more land when it became available, carefully expanding their holdings until the Hayes Ranch was one of the largest and most respected operations in the territory. Danny grew into a young man who was every bit as skilled with horses and cattle as his parents. Rose showed her own talents, taking over the bookkeeping when she was just 16 and revealing a shrewd business mind that impressed everyone who worked with her. Both children knew the value of hard work, and both were proud of what their parents had built. In 1890, Sarah and Russell celebrated their 10th wedding anniversary. They threw a party at the ranch, inviting everyone they knew from Abiquiu and the surrounding area. Charlie gave a toast that made everyone laugh and cry, talking about the young woman who had won a shooting contest and the young man who had been wise enough to recognize something special when he saw it. That night, after all the guests had gone home and the children were in bed, Sarah and Russell took a walk around their property. The moon was full, casting silver light across the pastures where their cattle grazed peacefully. They walked hand in hand, not talking much, just being together in the land they loved. "You remember what you said the first day I called on you?" Russell asked. "You said that this work makes sense to you, that you can see the results of your labor." "I remember. I feel the same way now. When I look at this ranch, at our children, at the life we have built together, I can see the results of our labor. We have built something that matters, Sarah, something that will last long after we are gone." "We did it together," Sarah said. "That is what makes it special." They stood on a hill overlooking the ranch. The house they had expanded several times to accommodate their growing family. The barns and corrals and outbuildings that represented years of hard work and careful planning. Sarah thought about that young woman who had won a shooting contest 14 years ago, how scared and determined she had been, how alone she had felt even surrounded by people. She thought about the young man who had clapped first, who had seen her worth when others were hesitant to acknowledge it. "I love you," she said to Russell. "I have loved you since the beginning, and I will love you until the end." "I love you too," he replied. "Every day, Sarah, every single day." The new century arrived with hope and change. New Mexico was moving toward statehood, bringing new laws and new opportunities. The Hayes Ranch continued to adapt and grow with the changing times. They added windmills to pump water more efficiently. They experimented with new breeds of cattle that were better suited to the high desert climate. They sent Danny to agricultural college in Colorado so he could learn the latest ranching techniques, and he came back full of ideas that he and Russell discussed for hours. Rose married a schoolteacher from Santa Fe in 1895, a quiet, intelligent man named Henry who loved her fierce independence and sharp mind. They settled in Abaquiu, where Henry taught at the local school, and Rose helped manage the ranch's business interests. Sarah and Russell became grandparents in 1896, and the joy of holding Rose's baby boy was almost as overwhelming as holding their own children had been. Danny married in 1898, choosing a rancher's daughter from a neighboring spread. Her name was Laura, and she fit into the Hayes family like she had always belonged there. She was a skilled rider and a hard worker, and Sarah was grateful that her son had found a partner who understood ranch life. As the years passed, Sarah and Russell gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations of the ranch, letting Danny and Charlie and the younger hands handle more of the work. It was not that they did not want to be involved, but their bodies were not as young as they used to be, and they had earned the right to slow down a little. They spent their time with their grandchildren, teaching them to ride and shoot and love the land as they did. Sarah taught Rose's son about horses, passing on the knowledge her own father had given her. Russell taught Danny's daughter to play the guitar, the same one he had played for Sarah all those years ago on their porch. On quiet evenings, they would still sit on that porch swing, watching the sun set over the mountains and talking about everything and nothing. Sometimes they would reminisce about the early days when they were young and building their life together from scratch. Sometimes they would talk about the future, about what would happen to the ranch when they were gone. "Danny will take good care of it," Russell said one evening in 1905. They were both in their early 50s now, their hair touched with gray but their love as strong as ever. "He loves this place as much as we do. I know he will, and Rose will keep the business running smoothly. We did a good job with them, Russell. We did a good job with everything." He pulled her closer, and she rested her head on his shoulder. "We built something wonderful here, Sarah. A family, a home, a legacy. It is more than I ever dreamed possible. All because you clapped first." Russell laughed, the sound warm and familiar and beloved. "All because you had the courage to enter that contest. All because you were remarkable enough to make me notice." They sat in silence for a while, comfortable and content. Sarah thought about the winding path that had brought them here, all the choices and chances and moments of grace. If she had not entered that shooting contest, if Russell had not been in town that day, if he had not had the courage to acknowledge her victory, everything would have been different. Their lives would have taken different paths, and they never would have found each other. But they had found each other. Against all odds, in a hard country that tested everyone who tried to make a life there, they had found each other and built something beautiful together. The ranch continued under Danny's management, growing and adapting to the 20th century. They added automobiles and telephones, electricity and all the modern conveniences that were slowly reaching even remote places like Abaquiu. But the core of the operation remained the same, a family ranch built on hard work, integrity, and love for the land. Sarah and Russell watched it all with pride and satisfaction. They had started with so little, just two people who loved each other and were willing to work toward a common dream. Now they had children and grandchildren, a thriving ranch that employed dozens of people, and a reputation for fair dealing that extended throughout the territory and beyond. In 1910, When New Mexico finally achieved statehood, the whole family celebrated together. They gathered at the ranch for a huge party, 3 generations of Hayes together, under one roof. Sarah looked around at the faces she loved, at the life she and Russell had created, and felt grateful beyond measure. That night, after everyone had gone home or to bed, Sarah found Russell standing on the porch looking out at the land they had worked for more than 30 years. She went to stand beside him, taking his hand in hers like she had done thousands of times before. "Do you remember the first time you stood on this porch?" she asked. "I remember everything about that day. You were mending a saddle strap, and I had picked wildflowers for you, and I was more nervous than I had ever been in my life. I was nervous, too. I kept thinking that you were too good to be true, that something would go wrong and I would lose you. You never lost me. You never will." They stood together watching the stars come out one by one in the vast New Mexico sky. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called and another answered. The land stretched out around them, beautiful and harsh and home. "We did good, did we not?" Sarah said softly. "We took what we had and made it into something wonderful." "We did very good," Russell agreed. "And you know what the best part is? We are not done yet. We have years ahead of us, Sarah. Years to watch our grandchildren grow, years to enjoy the life we built, years to love each other." And they did have years. Good years, full of family and work and love. Years of watching their grandchildren grow and having great-grandchildren. Years of quiet evenings on the porch and busy days helping however they could. Years of being together, being partners, being in love. Sarah Victoria Chambers Hayes lived to be 83 years old. She remained sharp and capable until the very end, still riding horses and offering advice on ranch operations well into her 70s. When she finally passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1939, surrounded by family, the whole county mourned. She had been a pioneer woman in the truest sense, someone who had helped build the West with her own 2 hands. Russell Hayes followed his beloved wife 6 months later. He had been lost without her, though he tried to stay strong for his children and grandchildren. But 58 years of marriage had intertwined their lives so completely that existing without her proved too difficult. He died quietly in his chair on the porch they had shared for so many years, the porch where he had first brought her wildflowers, where he had proposed, where they had watched their children and grandchildren play. They were buried together on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a shared headstone that read simply, "Sarah and Russell Hayes, partners in life and love, 1878–1939. The Hayes Ranch continued to thrive under Danny's management and later under his children's. The family stayed on the land, generation after generation, building on the foundation that Sarah and Russell had laid. The story of how they met, of the shooting contest and the cowboy who clapped first, became family legend, passed down to each new generation as a reminder of where they came from and what really matters. The old Winchester rifle that Sarah used to win that contest was kept in a place of honor in the ranch house, along with Russell's guitar and their wedding photograph. Future generations of Hayes children learned to shoot with that rifle, learned to play songs on that guitar, looked at that photograph, and understood that their family had been built on love and respect, and the courage to acknowledge when someone does something remarkable. The land that Sarah and Russell had loved so much, that they had worked so hard to build into something meaningful, continued to produce cattle and horses, and sustain the family for more than 100 years. The house was expanded and modernized, but the original rooms remained, a testament to the 2 people who had started it all. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blew just right across the New Mexico high desert, Some family members swore they could hear the distant sound of guitar music drifting from the old porch, and the soft murmur of two voices talking and laughing together. Whether it was memory or something more, it did not matter. What mattered was that Sarah and Russell's love story lived on, in the land they had tended, in the family they had created, and in the legacy of respect and partnership they had modeled for everyone who came after. It had all started with a shooting contest and one cowboy brave enough to clap first. But it had become so much more than that. It had become a love story for the ages, a testament to what two people can build when they work together with respect, determination, and hearts full of love. In the end, that was the real legacy Sarah and Russell Hayes left behind. Not just a successful ranch or a large family, but proof that true partnership, the kind built on mutual respect and genuine admiration, can create something that lasts long after the individuals are gone. Their story became part of the fabric of the West itself, woven into the history of New Mexico and the countless families who made their lives in that beautiful, harsh land. And every time someone heard the tale of the woman who won the shooting match and the cowboy who clapped first, they understood something fundamental about love and courage, and the importance of recognizing greatness when you see it, regardless of where it comes from or whether it fits with expectations. The Hayes family still gathered at the ranch for holidays and special occasions, multiple generations crowding into the old house that had been expanded so many times it barely resembled the original structure. But the heart of it remained, those first rooms that Sarah and Russell had shared, where they had raised their children and dreamed their dreams and loved each other through all the challenges and triumphs of a life lived fully. On the mantel in what had once been their bedroom, now preserved as a kind of family shrine, sat a small frame containing a faded blue ribbon. It was the prize Sarah had won at that shooting contest in August of 1878, the day everything changed. Next to it was a pressed wildflower, Indian paintbrush, from the bouquet Russell had brought on his first visit. And beside that was a photograph taken on their 50th wedding anniversary in 1928, showing an elderly couple still holding hands, still looking at each other with the same love and respect that had brought them together half a century before. The ranch house library, which Danny had added in the early 1900s, contained leather-bound journals that Sarah had kept throughout her life. Future generations would read her accounts of running the ranch, of raising her children, of the deep and abiding love she had for her husband. Russell's journals were there too, less poetic but no less moving, filled with practical observations about ranching and heartfelt passages about his wife and children. One entry from Russell's journal, dated December 25, 1890, read, "Today is Christmas, and we gathered the whole family together. Danny is 7 now, Rose is 6, and they fill this house with laughter and life. But the best gift I have is Sarah. Every day I thank whatever force in the universe led me to that plaza in Abaquiu 12 years ago. Every day I am grateful that I had the sense to recognize something special when I saw it, and the courage to claim it for my own. She is my partner, my love, my best friend, and my home. All the success we have had with this ranch means nothing compared to the success of our marriage. We built something real and lasting, and I could not be prouder or more grateful." Sarah's journal from the same day read, "Christmas with my little family. Russell gave me a new saddle, practical as always but made with such care and attention to what I need. The children gave me drawings and a scarf Rose knitted herself. But the real gift is simply being together, being warm and safe and loved. I think about the woman I was before Russell, alone and scared even though I tried not to show it. I think about how he saw me, really saw me when so many others looked away. He gave me more than love. He gave me partnership and respect and a future I could never have imagined. I hope our children learn from our marriage. Learn that real love is built on mutual respect and shared work toward common dreams. These journals, and hundreds like them spanning decades, became a treasured record not just of a family, but of a way of life that was already disappearing by the time Sarah and Russell passed away. The Wild West of legend, of quick-draw gunfights and lawless violence, had never really existed in Abiquiu. But the real West, the one of hard work and harsh conditions and people carving out lives from an unforgiving land, that was all true. And Sarah and Russell had lived it fully, creating something beautiful in the process. Their great-grandchildren, born in the 1920s and 1930s, grew up hearing stories about great-grandmother Sarah, who could outshoot any man, and great-grandfather Russell, who had been wise enough to appreciate her for it. These stories shaped how they understood relationships and respect, teaching them that true partnership means celebrating each other's strengths rather than feeling threatened by them. One great-granddaughter, named Sarah Rose Hayes in honor of both her great-grandmother and her grandmother, became a champion rodeo rider in the 1940s. She would tell reporters that she came from a long line of strong women and men secure enough to appreciate them. She kept a photograph of her great-grandparents in her saddle bag, a talisman of the legacy she was continuing. A great-grandson became a veterinarian and returned to work on the family ranch, applying modern science to the care of the animals while honoring the traditional knowledge that had been passed down through generations. He married a woman who was also a veterinarian, and together they modernized the ranch's animal care while maintaining the family's commitment to ethical, sustainable ranching practices. The Hayes Ranch adapted to each new era while maintaining its core values. During World War II, they supplied beef to the military and employed women in positions that had traditionally been reserved for men, honoring Sarah's legacy of breaking down gender barriers. During the environmental movement of the 1960s and 1970s, they were among the first ranches in the region to implement sustainable grazing practices, understanding that caring for the land was part of their responsibility. Through it all, the story of Sarah and Russell remained central to the family's identity. Every generation learned about the shooting contest, about the cowboy who clapped first, about the love story that followed. It was more than just family history. It was a roadmap for how to live, how to love, how to build something meaningful that would outlast any one individual. The porch where Sarah and Russell had spent so many evenings remained a gathering place for the family. It had been rebuilt and expanded over the years, but it occupied the same spot, looking out over the same land. Family members would sit there on summer evenings, watching the same sunsets that Sarah and Russell had watched, feeling connected to something larger than themselves. The original Winchester rifle was eventually donated to a museum, where it was displayed as part of an exhibition on women in the Old West. The placard next to it told Sarah's story, how she had won a shooting contest against 14 men in 1878, and how one cowboy had been brave enough to applaud her achievement. The exhibit drew crowds, particularly young girls who were fascinated by this woman who had been so skilled and so unapologetic about it. Russell's guitar went to a great-great-grandson who became a professional musician. He would play it at family gatherings, the same songs that Russell had played for Sarah more than a century before. The instrument had been carefully maintained over the years, its wood worn smooth by generations of hands, and it still produced a warm, rich tone that could bring tears to the eyes of those who understood its history. The land itself, that 400 acres that Sarah and Russell had assembled piece by piece, remained in the family. There were offers to buy it over the years, developers who wanted to turn it into subdivisions or commercial properties. But every generation of Hayes chose to keep the ranch intact, understanding that some things are more valuable than money. The land was their heritage, their connection to the past, and their responsibility to the future. In 2005, on the 125th anniversary of Sarah and Russell's wedding, the family held a massive reunion at the ranch. More than 200 descendants gathered from all over the country, filling the house and the yard and spilling out into the pastures. They shared stories and photographs, traced family trees, and celebrated the legacy that two people had created with their love and hard work. The oldest person there was a granddaughter, 98 years old, who had memories of both Sarah and Russell. She spoke to the assembled family about what they had been like, not as historical figures but as real people. She remembered Sarah's sharp wit and Russell's patient kindness, the way they would still hold hands after 50 years of marriage, the respect and affection that had been obvious in every interaction. They loved each other, she said, her voice wavering but strong. Every day, in big ways and small ways, they loved each other. That is what built all of this. Not just hard work or good luck, but love and respect and partnership. If you want to honor them, honor that. Find someone who sees your strengths and celebrates them. Be someone who sees others' strengths and celebrates them. That is what great-grandmother and great-grandfather taught us, and that is what we should pass on to our children. The applause that followed her words echoed across the ranch, across the same land where Sarah had once grazed her cattle and Russell had built fences, where their children had played and their grandchildren had learned to ride. It was applause for a life well lived, for a love story that had transcended time, for a legacy that continued to inspire. As the sun set on that reunion, painting the New Mexico sky in shades of orange and purple and pink, the family gathered on the hillside where Sarah and Russell were buried. They placed wildflowers on the grave, Indian paintbrush and purple aster, the same flowers Russell had once picked for Sarah. And as they stood there together, multiple generations connected by blood and story and land, they understood that Sarah and Russell's story was not really over. It continued in each of them, in the values they carried forward, in the love they shared with their own partners, in the respect they showed to those around them. The ranch continued on, as it had for more than a century, adapting to new challenges while maintaining its core identity. Solar panels were added to supplement the windmills. Advanced breeding programs were implemented to produce cattle that could thrive in changing climate conditions. But the basic work of ranching remained the same, caring for animals and land, working with the seasons, building something meaningful that would last. And every so often, when a young person in the family showed exceptional skill at something, someone would clap. It had become a family tradition, a way of acknowledging achievement and showing respect, a direct link to that day in 1878 when Russell Hayes had shown the courage to applaud a remarkable woman. The clapping was always slow and deliberate, just like Russell's had been, and everyone who heard it knew what it meant. It meant you have done something special, and I see you, and I respect you. That simple gesture, repeated across generations, became a through line connecting past and present. It was a reminder that seeing and acknowledging excellence in others, especially when that excellence challenges our expectations or makes us uncomfortable, is an act of courage and love. Russell had understood that instinctively in 1878, and his descendants understood it still. The story of Sarah and Russell Hayes, of the shooting contest and the cowboy who clapped first, became more than just family legend. It became a parable about respect and partnership, about the importance of celebrating people's strengths rather than feeling threatened by them. It was told at weddings and anniversaries, used as an example in discussions about relationships and equality, passed down as a model for how to build a life together. Because in the end, that was what Sarah and Russell had done. They had built a life together, brick by brick, year by year, choice by choice. They had weathered hardships and celebrated triumphs. They had raised children and built a business. They had loved each other through youth and middle age and into old age, their bond only growing stronger with time. And they had done it all based on a foundation of mutual respect, the kind of respect that Russell had shown when he clapped first at that shooting contest in 1878. Their legacy lived on not just in the ranch or the family or the material things they had built, but in the example they set for how to love and respect and partner with another person. It lived on in every descendant who chose a mate based on respect rather than convenience, who celebrated their partner's achievements rather than feeling diminished by them, who worked together toward common goals with honesty and dedication. The Wild West of 1878 was gone, replaced by modernity and technology and a completely different way of life. But the values that Sarah and Russell had embodied, those were timeless. Respect, courage, partnership, love, those things mattered just as much in the 21st century as they had in the 19th. And as long as their descendants remembered their story and tried to live by their example, Sarah and Russell Hayes would never truly be gone. They would live on in the land they had loved, in the family they had created, in the values they had modeled, and in the simple, powerful act of recognizing greatness when you see it and having the courage to clap first.